The alien queen shouted, "Who wants to marry me?" Only one human dared to raise his hand. The galactic convergence arena was nothing short of magnificent, a dizzying amalgamation of cultures, technology, and races that no Earthling could possibly dream of. Elias Trent stood on the edge of the platform, the sharp metallic scent of the arena air mixing with the electric hum of billions of spectators who'd gathered for the most absurd event in the galaxy. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near this place, a human, among all these beings. Yet here he was, staring at the throne of Queen Thalira, his palms damp, his pulse a little faster than usual. Thalira, the queen of the Veridin Empire, looked entirely out of place on her obsidian throne. With long, graceful ears sweeping down like delicate wings, skin the color of twilight, and eyes that glinted like polished silver, she radiated an authority that could reduce planets to ash with a glance. Her empire spanned entire star systems, and she had tested countless suitors, each more powerful, more intelligent, more everything. Yet none had ever passed her trials. None had ever dared to challenge her in the way that Elias had. None had dared to raise a hand when the question was posed. And what a question it was. "Who wants to marry me?" The words echoed through the stadium, amplified to reach every corner of the galaxy. And for a moment, everything fell silent. Every single one of the 1,000 species gathered here, each one more bizarre than the last, fell completely still. The air was thick with uncertainty. An insectoid creature, its legs clicking nervously, took a step back. A massive, hulking form that resembled a cross between a bear and a tank glared at the queen, unsure if she was serious. Even the smallest species, who looked like walking, talking fruits, paused, frozen mid-bounce. Elias couldn't help but snort. If there was one thing that he wasn't afraid of, it was the tension of a room full of awkwardness. "Guess she's not a fan of subtlety," he muttered to himself, adjusting the collar of his worn jacket. The queen's silver eyes swept over the crowd, her gaze practically dissecting every one of them. From the most advanced, star-faring minds to the brutish, war-hardened gladiators who had fought their way across the galaxies. No one said anything. No one moved. Elias shifted on his feet, his mind racing. Was this some sort of elaborate joke? A trap? Did aliens really do this? He glanced around at the chaos in the stands, the swirl of alien species so diverse that even a seasoned diplomat from Earth would have needed a translator just to find out which of them was actually in charge. There was no immediate danger, and yet there was something so alien about it all. He took a deep breath. "Well," Elias muttered under his breath, looking around at the sea of faces, "I'm either going to die a hero or an idiot." There was a moment of hesitation, and then he did it. Without thinking, without any kind of grand speech, without any dramatic pause or thought, Elias Trent raised his hand. It was an unconscious, almost reflexive action, like a nervous tic. He didn't even know why he did it. Perhaps it was the ridiculousness of the entire situation, the absurdity of standing in front of an ancient, terrifying alien queen while she casually asked for marriage proposals. Perhaps it was the challenge itself. Whatever it was, Elias Trent had, quite without meaning to, raised his hand and defied a galaxy of onlookers. The silence stretched. The queen's silver eyes locked onto him. Her gaze felt like it could strip him down to his bones, lay him bare before every living creature in the universe. And still, Elias stood there, unflinching, staring right back at her. "Very well, Earthman," Queen Thalira said, her voice a low, melodic drawl that reverberated in the pit of Elias's stomach. "Let the trials begin." There was no applause, no fanfare. No grand trumpet sounded to mark the beginning of what would surely be the most absurd, dangerous, and incredibly confusing series of events in his life. The queen, with a fluid, almost predatory grace, rose from her throne. Her long ears twitched as if in amusement. She descended from the dais, her gown flowing like liquid silver, and her eyes locked with Elias's as though she were studying him in a way no one had ever studied him before. He felt a twinge of something. Curiosity. Fear. Was this what it was like to stare into the eyes of something ancient, something almost otherworldly? I'm sorry, did you just say? Elias cleared his throat, his voice suddenly hoarse. Trials? She raised an elegant eyebrow. You're not suggesting you thought I was asking for a real marriage proposal, are you? Well, when you ask, who wants to marry me? In front of thousands of species, I kind of figured. Elias faltered for a moment, but then shrugged, his usual sarcasm creeping back into his voice. I mean, it's not like I get a second chance to say yes later, right? Thalira's lips twitched as if she were stifling a laugh. The audience watched, a mix of amusement and confusion rippling through them. You have a curious sense of humor for a human. Perhaps that will be useful. He didn't know if she was being sarcastic or genuinely intrigued. The expression on her face was unreadable, but there was something in her gaze, something old and knowing, as though she had seen galaxies burn and civilizations rise and fall, but never in all her vast experience had she encountered anyone quite like Elias Trent. I suppose, she continued, if you want to survive this, you will need far more than humor. You will need courage, intelligence, strength, wit, and most of all, Elias swallowed. What? The Queen leaned in, her voice dropping to a near whisper, only for him to hear, the ability to survive a very long week. Welcome to the first trial, Earthman. Before Elias could respond, the ground beneath him rumbled, and the arena floor parted with a sudden hiss. A huge mechanical creature, half organic, half steel, rose from the depths of the arena, its claws clicking against the floor, the air pulsing with the hum of its ancient power source. Best of luck, Thalira said, her tone now as sharp as a blade. You're going to need it. Elias stared at the creature, his stomach doing a full somersault. He tried to smile, but it came out more as a nervous twitch. Great, he muttered. This is going to be a blast. And with that, he stepped forward, ready to face whatever the Queen had in store for him. The creature in front of Elias was a Zornak, a nightmarish blend of metal and organic muscle, an apex predator designed for one thing and one thing only: destruction. Its massive claws scraped against the arena floor, sending sparks skittering across the polished surface. Every step it took shook the ground, the beast's eyes glowing with an eerie red light, and its growl reverberated through the stands, making even the bravest of gladiators shift uncomfortably in their seats. Elias took a deep breath. Well, this is going to be interesting, he muttered, adjusting the collar of his jacket as if it were business as usual. The crowd around him had fallen deathly silent, their eyes fixed on him. This was his trial, his first test, and if he didn't pass it, he'd be nothing more than a smear on the arena floor for the entertainment of thousands. How do I even fight that thing? Elias asked no one in particular, his voice rising slightly in desperation. Oh, you don't, came the voice of Queen Thalira, her amused tone floating down from her perch on the throne, her gaze never leaving him. That would be far too easy. No, Earthman, you must outsmart it, outwit it. Outwit it? Elias repeated incredulously, staring up at the towering creature. What, am I supposed to ask it for directions? Hey, buddy, can you point me to the nearest exit? A low chuckle escaped Thalira's lips. If that were the case, you might have a chance. But no, not this time. Elias was beginning to regret raising his hand. For the briefest moment, he considered retreating, but the Zornak's eyes were locked onto him now. There would be no running, at least not without becoming the thing's next meal. He took another step forward, his sneakers squeaking against the smooth floor. He'd been in dangerous situations before, but this felt different. The air was thick with the weight of countless alien eyes watching his every move, waiting for him to fail. And Queen Thalira, she was watching him too, not with disdain, but with something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or amusement. All right, he said, putting on a brave face, though his stomach was doing flips. What's the plan? I mean, sure, this guy's a walking nightmare, but I've got a brain, and I think I know how to use it. With that, he glanced around the arena for anything that could help him. The stands were massive, almost impossibly high, with hundreds of spectators from every corner of the galaxy. The arena floor itself was smooth, almost too smooth for comfort. But there, near the center, was a series of shimmering holographic platforms. Part of the trial, no doubt. Thalira wasn't going to make this easy, he realized. The Zornak wasn't the only obstacle here. The Zornak roared, snapping Elias out of his thoughts. The beast charged forward, its claws slashing at the air, sending a spray of sparks from the ground where they scraped across the floor. It was faster than Elias had expected, and its roar was loud enough to rattle his bones. For a split second, Elias thought about trying to dodge, but the Zornak's reach was too long. He'd be a dead man before he even had a chance to blink. Instead, he did the only thing that came to mind. "Excuse me," Elias shouted, his voice wobbling with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "Excuse me, I'm not really looking for a fight here, okay? Can we talk this out?" The Zornak didn't respond. In fact, it seemed to accelerate toward him, its claws gleaming with deadly intent. Elias yelped and ducked to the side, narrowly avoiding the swipe of the creature's claws. The ground trembled as the Zornak's massive hand missed him by inches, its weight crashing into the arena floor with a deafening thud. The beast snarled in frustration and turned to face him again, its crimson eyes glowing brighter. "Okay, so that's not going to work," Elias muttered. "Plan B it is." He glanced around for anything useful. There, a stack of discarded equipment near the side of the arena. The Zornak was still focused on him, but Elias saw an opportunity. He dashed for the pile, diving into it head first. A few seconds later, he emerged holding a long, glowing metal rod. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The Zornak gave an earth-shaking growl, charging again. This time, Elias didn't flinch. He swung the rod toward the beast, not aiming for its body, but for the panel embedded in the Zornak's chest. A small, blinking light, likely its power source. The rod connected with the panel, sending a sharp electrical shock through the creature. The Zornak screeched in pain, stumbling back, its movements jerky as the power coursed through it. Elias took a step back, catching his breath. "That's right, you overgrown scrap heap," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Let's see how you handle a little jolt." For a moment, the Zornak paused, its red eyes flickering. Then, to Elias's shock, it began to change. The creature's mechanical components shifted, and its organic parts rearranged themselves. Its body contorted, and it began to lose its focus, growing erratic. Okay, that's new," Elias said, his eyebrows knitting together. The Zornak was malfunctioning, its systems overloaded by the electrical surge. It looked like it was trying to adjust, but it wasn't succeeding. The lights in its eyes flickered and dimmed, and it stumbled forward, clearly off balance. Elias, sensing his window of opportunity, took another step back. Okay, come on. Just a little more." Suddenly, the Zornak let out a final screech, its form collapsing to the ground in a heap. Its once mighty body was now twitching and sparking, a combination of technology and biology malfunctioning before his eyes. The crowd erupted into applause, the noise deafening as the arena's barriers lowered, signaling the end of the first trial. Elias stood there panting, his heart pounding in his chest. "Well, that was a lot easier than I expected." He glanced up toward Thalira, who was watching him with an expression that was both impressed and curious. Her silver eyes gleamed in the dim light as she spoke. "You survived," she said, her voice filled with something that bordered on admiration. "But tell me, Earthman, how did you know the Zornak's weakness?" Elias gave her a grin, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Lucky guess?" Thalira's lips curled into a smile, almost but not quite a laugh. "You're more resourceful than I gave you credit for." "Hey, it's all in a day's work," Elias said with a wink, even though his legs felt like jelly. "Now can I go get a snack? I'm starving." Thalira's expression softened, her long ears twitching in what Elias could only describe as amusement. "The next trial will be more difficult, Earthman. You've only just begun." "Great," Elias said, shaking his head. "Just what I needed, a harder challenge." The roar of the crowd still echoed in Elias's ears as he stood in the middle of the arena, trying to catch his breath. The Zornak lay in a heap of sparks and twisted metal, its body smoking in the stillness. Elias felt a momentary surge of pride, but it was quickly swallowed by a sinking feeling in his gut. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Behind him, the arena floor began to shift. Panels in the ground rose up, revealing strange glowing symbols and intricate designs. The air hummed with energy as the next trial was announced, by none other than Queen Thalira herself. The first trial was but a warm-up, she called out, her voice effortlessly carrying across the vast stadium. Now, for something far more challenging, prepare yourselves. Elias took a moment to steady himself. He wasn't sure whether he should feel reassured or terrified by the fact that the queen seemed genuinely entertained. But at least, he thought, there was some humor in the absurdity of it all. What had started as a bizarre request to marry her had turned into a series of increasingly ridiculous challenges. And now, this. The ground beneath Elias's feet began to tremble, and a series of low-frequency vibrations hummed through the arena floor. He glanced at the platforms that had risen from the ground. They were glowing with an ethereal blue light, each marked with a different symbol. Before he could make heads or tails of what was going on, a voice echoed through the arena. "Welcome to the trials of the mind," the voice boomed. "Prepare yourself, Earthman, for what is to come. Your wits will be tested, your very ability to think on your feet." "Oh, perfect," Elias muttered. "I'm great at thinking on my feet." He glanced around and saw the alien spectators leaning forward, their faces illuminated by the glowing symbols on the platforms. Some were humanoid, others were completely unrecognizable. Walking masses of shifting energy, floating spheres of consciousness, and hulking figures with more limbs than seemed physically possible. But every one of them was watching him intently, waiting for him to fail. His gaze returned to the platforms. They were arranged in a circle around him, each one separated by several feet. At the center of the arena, a large holographic screen flickered to life, displaying a maze of shifting symbols, numbers, and equations. Elias squinted. It looked like some sort of puzzle, complicated, confusing, and definitely not something he was equipped to solve. But what did he know about puzzles? He was just a guy from Earth, with an unhealthy addiction to crossword puzzles and a penchant for sarcastic quips. He wasn't a genius. He wasn't some super soldier. He was here somehow. Thalira's voice sliced through his thoughts. "Figure it out, Earthman," she said, a sly smile playing on her lips. "Your next trial is one of logic. Solve the puzzle and you pass. Fail and, well, let's just say I'd hate to see what happens to those who fail my trials." "Gee, thanks for the vote of confidence," Elias muttered, eyeing the puzzle on the screen. The symbols seemed to shift with a mind of their own, rearranging themselves into increasingly more complex patterns. All right, Elias thought. No pressure. He had two options. Stand there like a deer in headlights or dive in headfirst and hope for the best. He'd been lucky with the Zornak, but this was a different kind of beast altogether. He took a deep breath and stepped onto the first platform. The moment his foot made contact with it, a sudden rush of information filled his mind. Data, equations, diagrams, and formulas that seemed to flood his brain all at once. His head spun. It was like being plugged into the Matrix, only with far less cool special effects. "Great," Elias muttered, rubbing his temples as the symbols on the platform danced in his vision. "Just what I needed. A crash course in intergalactic mathematics." He stumbled back a few steps, trying to regain his balance. His brain was struggling to process the alien concepts, but there was one thing he knew. He had to find a way to break the puzzle down. It wasn't just about memorizing alien equations. It was about recognizing patterns. He moved to the next platform, the pressure increasing with every step. As soon as he stepped onto it, more symbols bombarded his mind, like a flood of alien languages mixing into one. The symbols didn't make sense at first, but then he began to see the connections, the shapes, the lines, the way the patterns repeated. A theory started to form in his mind. He wasn't solving equations, he was recognizing patterns, using logic, the same way he solved crosswords back home. It was like deciphering a code, only this one was way more complicated. "All right, you glorious, glowing symbols, let's see what you got," Elias muttered, his voice laced with sarcasm. "If I can solve this, I might just get a Nobel Prize, or a terrible alien wedding proposal. Either way, it's a win." The symbols shifted again, almost as if they were mocking him. His thoughts raced as he pieced together the patterns. The problem with alien puzzles was that you couldn't always trust your human instincts. The logic was alien too. But then, just as his mind started to crack under the pressure, he saw it. A break in the pattern. A sequence that didn't fit with the rest. A flaw in the otherwise perfect symmetry. "Gotcha," Elias muttered, his eyes lighting up with excitement. He tapped his foot against the platform and focused on the misaligned sequence, tweaking it. The puzzle shifted again, like a lock clicking into place. The ground beneath him rumbled as the symbols on the screen began to align, forming a coherent sequence. The puzzle was solved. Elias let out a long breath, half in relief, half in disbelief. The holographic screen flickered and vanished, and the platforms began to retract into the ground. The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers deafening, but Elias didn't have the energy to smile just yet. He had passed. Barely. From above, Thalira's voice rang out once more, and this time, there was a definite hint of respect in her tone. "Well done, Earthman," she said. "You've shown that you are capable of more than just brawn, but don't get comfortable. The next trial will require more than just a sharp mind." "Great," Elias said, rubbing his temples. "More puzzles. Or maybe a dragon this time?" The Queen's laugh echoed through the arena, and Elias couldn't help but feel a small spark of triumph. At least for the moment, he had earned her respect. But he knew that the real challenge was yet to come. The arena had fallen eerily quiet after the puzzle trial. The crowd, once roaring with the excitement of an impossible challenge, had now settled into an expectant hush. Elias stood, catching his breath, feeling the weight of their gazes pressing down on him. The air felt thick, charged, as if something monumental was about to happen. And as it turned out, something monumental was about to happen. "Impressive, Earthman," Thalira's voice rang through the arena, her tone warm with approval. "But don't get too comfortable. The next trial will test your very survival." Elias's stomach twisted. Survival? What was that supposed to mean? Before he could process the Queen's words, the floor beneath his feet began to shift again, the ground beneath him vibrating. The edges of the arena started to glow, and a low hum filled the air. His heart began to pound in his chest. This was different. This felt real, like something truly dangerous was about to unfold. Then suddenly, the sky above the arena darkened. The artificial lighting dimmed, and a low growl echoed from the farthest corners of the arena. Elias squinted toward the noise. A shadow appeared, moving quickly across the arena floor, its massive form outlined against the flickering lights. There was something wrong with the creature. Its shape was vast and amorphous, like a living nebula made of dark energy, swirling and shifting, as though it was made of the fabric of the universe itself. Tentacles, no, more like ribbons of pure darkness, whipped through the air, crackling with electric energy. Elias's eyes widened in horror as the creature stepped fully into the arena, its massive, undulating form taking shape. He could see its glowing eyes now, the deep violet of its irises swirling with a strange cosmic light. And at the center of the creature's mass, a large, gaping maw opened, revealing row after row of razor-sharp teeth gleaming like a field of stars. Elias said, his voice a little unsteady as he tried to back away. "I'm guessing this isn't a petting zoo." Thalira's voice, smooth as ever, came from above. "No, Earthman. This is Clithar, the devourer of stars. It is a creature born from the collapse of a dying star, made from the very dark matter of the universe itself." Elias swallowed. "Great. I'm really looking forward to meeting him. Real friendly-looking guy." "Survive it, and you pass," Thalira continued, ignoring his sarcasm. "Failure, however, would mean your end, or perhaps a much worse fate." "You're starting to sound like a motivational speaker," Elias muttered. "Well, all right then. Bring it on, Star Eater." The Clithar let out a deep, rumbling growl, and Elias felt the ground tremble beneath him. Without warning, the creature lunged forward, its shadowy tendrils slashing through the air with terrifying speed. Elias barely managed to dodge the first strike, the tip of one dark tentacle grazing his shoulder and sending sparks flying as if it had scraped through the very fabric of reality itself. Okay, no big deal. Just another day in paradise," Elias muttered, rolling out of the way and getting to his feet in one fluid motion. His heart raced as the Claythar reared back, its eyes locking onto him with a predatory hunger. It was fast. Faster than anything he'd ever faced before. But it wasn't just fast, it was smart, almost like it was learning from his movements. Elias's mind raced. What the hell was he supposed to do against something like this? His brain flashed back to the Zornak. That had been brute force. This was a whole other level. There was no physical strength here to counter. This wasn't a fight of muscle, it was a fight of wits and timing. He scrambled to his feet and dodged another slashing tendril, his hands gripping the ground as he pushed himself out of the way just in time. A piece of rock broke off from the floor, careening toward him, and he barely had time to flinch before it crashed into his shoulder. Damn it, Elias cursed under his breath. He could feel the sting, but it wasn't bad. It wasn't anything he couldn't shake off. But his options were limited. What was the weak point? He needed something. A crack in the armor, a flaw, anything. Think, he muttered to himself. He could see the Clyther's tendrils, but they were like liquid shadow, impossible to track, impossible to predict. He wasn't fighting a creature of flesh and bone. He was fighting something that seemed to bend the laws of nature. Then it hit him. The creature wasn't just made of dark matter. It was dark matter. The Clythar was part of the universe's fabric, and if he could disrupt that fabric, if he could somehow destabilize it, the idea was risky, but it was all he had. All right, let's see if I'm right, Elias muttered to himself, looking around for anything that might give him an edge. He noticed a pattern. Small bursts of energy, like cracks in the air itself, were appearing around the creature every time it attacked. Clythar wasn't just attacking him, it was using the energy of the arena, tapping into the space around it. Perfect, Elias said, grinning. He picked up a piece of broken debris, a jagged shard of rock, and flung it at the creature. As expected, Clythar's tendrils darted toward the shard, its maw snapping open in anticipation. Just as the creature took the bait, Elias leapt to the side, grabbing a large metal rod that had been left behind from the previous trial. It wasn't much, but it was enough. As the Clythar's attention was fixed on the shard, Elias slammed the rod into one of the glowing cracks in the air, channeling the electric energy that surged through the arena. The rod connected with the rift, sending a ripple of energy through the Clythar's body. The creature screeched, its tendrils convulsing violently, as if the very foundation of its existence had been disturbed. Elias barely had time to duck as a wave of dark energy lashed out, the tendrils whipping past him, but he could see it working. The creature was losing control. Come on, Elias muttered, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He didn't have much time. The Clythar's tendrils were still thrashing, but now they were erratic, more desperate. He had a feeling that if he could just disrupt the energy flow one more time. With a burst of speed, he leapt toward another rift, driving the metal rod deep into it. The entire arena trembled, the air thickening with pressure, and for a brief moment, everything seemed to slow down. The Clythar howled in pain, its form flickering, destabilizing, as it began to collapse into the very energy it was born from. Finally, with a final explosion of dark matter, the creature vanished, its form dissipating into the empty space of the arena. Elias collapsed to his knees, breathing heavily, his hands trembling from the effort. The arena was silent for a moment, utterly still. Then slowly the audience erupted into applause. The sounds of cheering and clapping filled the air, but Elias barely registered it. He was still trying to catch his breath, trying to process what had just happened. He had survived. Again. From above, Thalira's voice cut through the noise. "You did it, Earthman," she said, the hint of a smile in her voice. "But remember, survival is not the end. It is merely the beginning." Elias took a deep breath and stood, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Great. I was hoping for a little vacation after this." The Queen's laughter echoed through the arena, and Elias couldn't help but grin. At least he had earned a brief moment of respite, but he knew better than to get comfortable. Whatever came next, it was going to be even harder. And knowing his luck, it would probably involve some sort of sentient space whale. Elias couldn't shake the feeling that something weird was coming next. Sure, he'd survived the puzzle, then he'd somehow pulled off a miracle with the Clythar. but there was an eerie stillness hanging in the air now. The arena was quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of quiet that made your skin crawl, like the calm before an inevitable storm, or in his case, before the next death trap. He looked up at the towering figure of Queen Thalira, who sat perched on her majestic throne, her eyes glittering with something that could only be described as glee. Beneath her, the arena had turned into an expanse of swirling, holographic light patterns, a perfect contrast to the deadly trials he'd faced so far. "Ready for the next challenge, Earthman?" Thalira's voice rang out, smooth and teasing, yet there was a hint of something darker beneath it. "I do hope you've been practicing your space swimming." Elias blinked. "Space swimming?" he repeated. "What the—" Before he could finish his sentence, the ground beneath him began to tremble again, the vibrations low and intense. The air seemed to warp and shift, twisting like heat rising off pavement. And then, without warning, a large segment of the floor slid open, revealing a massive pool of liquid that shimmered like molten silver. The surface was undulating, moving of its own accord, as though alive. "Space swimming," Thalira repeated, a playful smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I suggest you dive in, Earthman. It's a true test of your endurance and your survival instincts." "Endurance and survival instincts?" Elias echoed, staring down at the shimmering liquid. "You've got to be kidding me. Space swimming? What is this? A reality show now?" The crowd around him let out a series of intrigued murmurs, their eyes following every movement, waiting for him to make his next move. It was like the universe had conspired to turn this whole affair into the strangest game show imaginable. The more Elias thought about it, the more absurd it seemed, and yet, his feet were already inching closer to the edge of the glowing pool. Any chance this is some kind of really expensive hot tub?" Elias asked, trying to crack a joke to stave off the nervousness building in his gut. The Queen's laughter rang out, pure and unrestrained. "I'm afraid not, Earthman. You see, the liquid in that pool is not what you might think it is. It is noxenium, a rare, volatile substance that's found only in the most extreme environments of the galaxy. It's used as both a fuel source and a weapon, and you'll need to swim through it to survive." "Volatile fuel? Weapons?" Elias said, his voice rising in disbelief. "And you want me to swim in it?" Thalira gave him a sidelong glance, the kind that suggested she wasn't entirely unsympathetic, but also didn't care if he survived or not. "Don't worry, Earthman. It's perfectly safe. For a short while." "Perfectly safe," Elias repeated dryly. "That's reassuring." The crowd was getting more restless now, buzzing with excitement. It was clear they loved the show. Meanwhile, Elias was standing on the precipice of a pool that was both terrifying and utterly alien. The liquid bubbled with strange energy, shifting colors in response to his proximity. The edges of the pool emitted an eerie hum, almost like the sound of distant machinery. He felt a hand on his shoulder, and Elias spun around, ready to fend off whatever new horror was about to assault him. But instead, he was met by a grinning alien with a ridiculously large head and an even larger set of teeth, who handed him what looked like a rubberized spacesuit. "You might need this," the alien said, its voice high-pitched but oddly comforting. "Helps with the swim. Trust me, you won't want to go in there without it." "Gee, thanks," Elias said, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he eyed the suit. "What's next? Space goggles?" The alien gave him a solemn nod. "Space goggles are optional." "Right. All right," Elias muttered, shrugging off his disbelief as best he could. This wasn't the time for sarcasm, or at least that's what he told himself as he slid into the suit, which, surprisingly, fit like a second skin. The material was light, almost imperceptible, and once it was on, it seemed to mold to his body perfectly. With a deep breath, Elias turned toward the shimmering pool, where the surface was now bubbling in a slow, rhythmic pattern. He wasn't entirely sure what to expect, but he sure as hell wasn't going to let this be the end of him. Not after everything he'd already survived. He glanced back at Thalira, who was watching him with keen interest. "What happens if I, don't make it?" Her smile remained, but her eyes were colder than ever. "Let's just say you'll be providing a great deal of entertainment for the rest of the arena." She didn't say anything else, and that silence spoke volumes. Elias gritted his teeth. If he was going down, he was going down fighting. Taking a deep breath, he jumped into the pool. The moment he hit the surface, he felt the liquid surge around him. It wasn't like water. It wasn't even like any liquid he'd ever encountered. It was dense, thick, almost like swimming through a gel that reacted to every movement, every stroke. The noxinium seemed to cling to him, as if it had its own gravity, pulling him deeper with each passing second. A jolt of energy shot through his body, and Elias gasped, the air crackling with an electric charge. His muscles burned with the strain of swimming through the viscous liquid, and the weight of it pressed against his chest, making each movement more exhausting than the last. He could feel the heat radiating from the noxinium. This was more than just an obstacle. It was a trial of endurance, a test of how much he could handle before it broke him. A few meters in, and Elias could already feel his strength waning. The liquid seemed to sap his energy with every stroke, like it was feeding on his very life force. It wasn't painful, not in the way that an injury would be, but it was draining, almost hypnotic in its pull. Okay, he muttered through gritted teeth. I've been in worse. I've definitely been in worse. And then, of course, things got worse. He felt something shift beneath him, a ripple in the liquid that wasn't caused by his movements. He spun around, heart leaping in his chest, just in time to see a large mass emerging from the depths of the pool. It was a creature, or perhaps a series of creatures, made of writhing tendrils of the same shimmering liquid. The creature lunged toward him, its long, fluid appendages darting through the noxinium like knives through butter. Elias barely had time to dodge as one of the tendrils shot past his head, missing by a fraction. Okay, now we're getting into the fun part, Elias grumbled, trying to catch his breath as the creature circled around him. It was fast, almost impossibly so, and it seemed to feed off the very energy that coursed through the pool. His mind raced, trying to come up with some kind of plan, but there was no time for strategy. He couldn't fight it in this dense liquid, but he sure as hell wasn't going to just let it take him down. As the creature lunged at him again, Elias dodged, his feet slipping on the slick surface. He was running out of room, running out of energy. And then he saw it, right beneath the creature, a weak point, a shimmering crack in the noxinium. If he could just reach it. Without thinking, Elias propelled himself forward, his body aching from the effort, his limbs on fire. With one final burst of strength, he reached the crack in the liquid, and just as the creature lunged once more, Elias slammed his fist into the rift. The noxinium erupted in a shower of electric sparks, and the creature screeched, its form flickering and destabilizing. The pool itself seemed to rebel, the liquid churning violently before collapsing inward, pulling the creature into itself. Elias fought to keep his head above the surface, gasping for air as the chaos around him settled. The creature was gone, consumed by the very substance that had birthed it. The pool, once again calm, rippled softly beneath him. Well, that wasn't so bad, Elias said, although his voice was hoarse from the exertion. Not bad at all. The crowd, which had gone silent during the chaos, erupted into cheers once more. From above, Thalira's voice rang out, cutting through the applause. "You've passed, Earthman," she said, her tone more than a little impressed. "But don't think I've forgotten what's coming next." "Great," Elias muttered. "Let me guess, more swimming?" Elias was floating in an odd mixture of exhaustion and disbelief. He'd just survived swimming through a viscous liquid that could drain the life out of you and faced off against a creature made entirely of it. And still, somehow, he was alive. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this worn out, and yet the thrill of survival kept him going. As he slowly paddled toward the edge of the pool, the ground beneath him shifted again, a slight rumble that signaled the end of one trial and the beginning of another. He pulled himself out of the shimmering liquid, his body aching and shaking from the effort. His spacesuit had somehow held up, but his mind was more concerned with the fact that Thalira was still watching from her throne, looking as if she hadn't moved an inch the entire time. The Queen's voice rang out, smooth as always, cutting through the buzzing tension of the arena. "You've made it through the swimming challenge, Earthman. Impressive. But as you know, I do not like to repeat myself." Elias stood shakily, wiping the last traces of noxenium from his face, only to feel something sticky still clinging to his fingers. "Yeah, I'm starting to notice that," he said, trying to catch his breath. "Look, lady, what's next? Some kind of intergalactic wrestling match with a sentient black hole?" "Nothing so tedious," Thalira responded, her tone still casual, as though she were discussing the weather. "This time you will face your own fears. A true test of will and mind." Elias blinked. "Fears? Oh, this should be fun. I'm sure a giant alien version of my childhood bully is going to appear any second now." The Queen's lips curled into a smile, though her eyes remained unreadable. "In a way, yes. But this will be no simple illusion, Earthman. You will enter a dimension where your deepest insecurities take physical form. Defeat them, and you may continue. Fail, and I shall consider your challenge ended." "Well, that doesn't sound ominous at all," Elias muttered. "What could possibly go wrong?" With a sharp motion, Thalira raised her hand, and the air around Elias shimmered, warping like a heat wave rising from hot pavement. Before he could react, a bright light flashed, and the arena vanished entirely, replaced by a vast, endless void filled with swirling colors and shapes that didn't make sense. Elias felt himself pulled into the middle of it, the very fabric of reality bending and twisting like a shattered mirror. He stumbled, disoriented, finding himself standing on solid ground again. But this wasn't the arena anymore. The gravity here felt off, heavier but less stable, as though it were about to flip in a heartbeat. Okay, I get it," Elias muttered, looking around. "Some kind of mind-bending simulation. Very fancy." And then the ground beneath him cracked open. Out of the jagged fissure, a figure emerged, a familiar figure, a man tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that hung in messy waves. The figure wore an old military uniform, the kind Elias had seen in the dusty boxes of his childhood home. His father, Elias's estranged parent, was standing right in front of him. "Elias," the figure said, his voice deep and tinged with authority, "you've disappointed me. You always disappoint me." Elias's stomach twisted, his breath catching in his throat. This wasn't real, it couldn't be. But it felt real. The voice, the look in his father's eyes, the way his chest tightened with that familiar sense of inadequacy. It was all too much. "Dad?" Elias said, his voice shaking slightly despite his best efforts to keep it steady. This isn't real, right? You're not really here. This is just part of whatever weird thing Thalira's put me through." The figure took a step forward, the air rippling around him as though reality itself were warping in response. "You can lie to yourself all you want, Elias, but you know the truth. You were never good enough. Not for me, not for anyone." Elias's throat went dry, his mind racing for something to say. The memories flooded back, being yelled at for failing to live up to his father's impossible standards, never being able to do anything right in his eyes. He could feel the weight of that old resentment pulling at him. "No," Elias said, his voice cracking. You don't get to do this. You can't just show up and—" But the figure interrupted him, the same cold, indifferent gaze locked on his face. "It's too late for you, Elias. You'll never be anything more than a failure. You're alone. You always have been." With a snap of his fingers, the world around Elias shifted again. This time it wasn't just his father standing before him. It was his entire life. The endless failures, the missed opportunities, the people he'd let down. The weight of every disappointment he'd ever felt crashed over him like a tidal wave. And then, in the distance, he saw another figure, a woman. Her hair was long and golden, her smile soft but sad. It was Claire, the woman he had loved and lost, the one he'd never truly confessed his feelings to, the one whose memory haunted him. "Elias," her voice was a whisper in the chaos, "you could have had everything you ever wanted, but you were too afraid to take it." "No," Elias said again, shaking his head. "No, I didn't." "You never took the chance," Claire's voice cut through his protests. "You never took me seriously, and now look at us. You failed us both." The painful knot in his chest tightened. It wasn't fair. None of this was fair. These weren't real people. They were just figments of his mind, reflections of everything he regretted. And yet they felt more real than anything he'd experienced. He clenched his fists, his anger rising as the weight of his past seemed to suffocate him. "You're not real," he growled, stepping forward, forcing himself to face the images that taunted him. "None of this is real. You're just—" The air around him flickered again, and in a flash of light, everything stopped. The figures, the voices, the crushing weight of failure, they all disappeared. The ground under his feet solidified once more, and suddenly he was standing in an empty space. "I'm not a failure," Elias said, his voice barely above a whisper, but firm. "I survived, and I'm not going to let these illusions, whatever they are, break me." The world around him rippled again, and a deep, booming laugh echoed through the void. Thalira's voice filled the silence. "Ah, Earthman, how delightful. You've passed this trial as well. You faced your fears, and you did not break. But remember, the most dangerous illusions are the ones you create yourself." Elias took a deep breath, his heart still racing. He had faced down his past, his mistakes, his regrets, and somehow he'd walked away with his mind intact. "Yeah," he muttered, his voice hoarse but defiant, "but I'm still waiting for the real challenge." The Queen's voice, now laced with a hint of admiration, replied, "Don't worry, Earthman. That's still to come." Elias stood in the center of the galactic convergence arena, his body battered and worn, but his spirit somehow stronger than it had been when this entire absurd journey had begun. He'd been through puzzles, creatures, mind games, and nightmares made flesh, but here he was, still standing. He was alive, and as ridiculous as it seemed, he couldn't deny the feeling that something inside him had shifted, something fundamental had changed. The crowd, the same sea of alien species who had watched his every move with wide-eyed anticipation, was eerily silent now. The thrill of the challenge had given way to a tense, expectant quiet. They were waiting. Elias was waiting too, but for what, he wasn't entirely sure. Thalira had promised something big, and if her past trials were any indication, it was probably going to be more than a little terrifying. Queen Thalira's form descended from her throne, her long, graceful figure cutting through the air like a wraith. Her dark eyes locked onto his, assessing him in that sharp, unnerving way of hers. "Well done, Earthman. You have made it this far. Not many have." "Yeah, well, you make a mean obstacle course," Elias replied, his voice hoarse but still tinged with humor. "I've had worse than this, though. I mean, really had worse." Thalira arched a brow, the slightest hint of amusement playing at her lips. "Really? You've had worse than a death trap made of noxinium? Or facing off against your deepest insecurities?" "I grew up with family," Elias said, rubbing his sore arms. "That's more than enough to make a guy mentally tough. But thanks for the workouts." The Queen didn't laugh, but there was a glimmer of something in her eyes. Admiration, perhaps? Or maybe she just respected the human's ability to keep his cool. "You have proven yourself, Earthman," Thalira said, her voice low, almost contemplative. "You survived the trials, faced your fears, and did so without crumbling under the pressure. It's rare to see that kind of strength in someone so human." Elias shrugged. "I'm not sure how to take that as a compliment. I mean, it's kind of a backhanded one, right?" Her lips twitched. "You're smarter than most humans, I'll give you that." Elias straightened, sensing the shift in the air. "Okay, so what now? You gonna send me home with a commemorative t-shirt and a thanks for playing message?" The Queen chuckled, but it was a deep, almost melancholy sound. "You misunderstand, Earthman. There is no going back for you. Not in the way you think. You've become a part of something much larger now. Something that transcends the petty boundaries of your world." "Wait, what?" Elias blinked. "Are you trying to tell me I'm, like, some kind of chosen one now or something?" Thalira's smile was cryptic, enigmatic. "In a way, the trials you faced weren't merely to test your physical and mental limits. They were to prepare you. The galaxy needs someone like you. Someone who understands loss, who understands how to survive when everything seems stacked against you." Elias rubbed the back of his neck, trying to process the sudden weight of her words. He hadn't come here expecting to be a hero. He'd come here because his own sense of self-doubt had pushed him to this moment. And now to hear Thalira speak as though he had a larger purpose? I don't know what kind of cosmic joke you're playing, but I'm not interested in ruling the galaxy or whatever it is you think I'm suited for, Elias said, his voice firm. I've already been through enough of this stuff for one lifetime. Thalira's gaze softened for the first time. You misunderstand. I don't expect you to lead armies or wield power, but you have something no one else does. You've been forged in adversity, and you understand something we all need to remember, that no matter how far we push ourselves, how much we strive for power or domination, there's always something more important. Ilias raised an eyebrow. And that would be the connection between us all, she said. The common thread that binds even the most disparate of beings together. Unity, empathy, the strength to push forward, not because of what we can conquer, but because of what we can protect. Elias blinked. Empathy? You think I have that? Thalira inclined her head. You faced your deepest fears, but instead of crumbling, you rose. You cared enough about what you had left behind to keep fighting. That is the mark of strength. He didn't know how to respond to that. His life had been a series of failures, missteps, and regrets. But now, standing before the queen of an alien race, he couldn't help but feel the weight of her words settle in his chest, a truth he hadn't expected to hear. So what's the next trial then? Elias asked, trying to change the subject. Some kind of intergalactic war, a space monster with 1,000 heads, or am I going to have to save some planetary system from an asteroid collision? Thalira's smile was genuine this time. No, Earthman, the final test was never about what you would do for others. It's about what you've done for yourself. You've changed. You are the proof that a single person can make a difference, even in a universe as vast as this. Ilias let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. So I passed, huh? Thalira nodded. You've more than passed, Earthman. You've evolved. The arena shifted around them, the crowd's silent energy now transformed into a rumbling of approval. But in the midst of the applause, Elias felt something settle in him, a quiet peace. He wasn't just a survivor anymore. He was someone who had confronted his demons and emerged on the other side. So, Elias said with a tired grin, am I still getting that commemorative t-shirt? Maybe a trophy of some sort? The queen laughed, the sound echoing through the arena, rich and full of warmth. If you want a trophy, Earthman, I'll give you the galaxy. For the first time since he'd arrived, Elias felt something stir within him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. He wasn't just passing through the galaxy anymore. He was part of it, intricately woven into its grand, ever-changing tapestry. His journey had been hard, filled with moments of doubt, pain, and near defeat. But now, standing before a queen of another world, he understood something fundamental. The universe wasn't something to conquer. It was something to experience, to connect with. As the applause continued to reverberate around him, Elias smiled, looking up at Thalira. Guess I'll need to find a way to live up to this new title of mine. Thalira's smile softened again, her eyes glimmering. You already have, Earthman. And as the crowd's cheers reached a crescendo, Elias realized that this was just the beginning. His journey had taken him through unimaginable trials, yes, but it had also shown him who he could be. A man who, against all odds, had chosen to keep fighting. And maybe, just maybe, that was the most important thing of all. The end.